Good morning, everyone. My name is Mel Hartley, and I am the Senior Communications and Regulation Officer here at the Training Accreditation Council, and I'd like to welcome you to this workshop on internal audit. This is part 2 of a 3-part series, with part 1 able to be viewed on the TAC website, and there are still spots available for part 3, which will be run this time next Monday. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk Noongar people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. Now I'd like to introduce you to Claire Werner, who is our presenter for today and for the rest of the series. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Mel, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here on Monday morning. For those of you who are joining us from the eastern states, good afternoon. So this is session 2, as Mel has mentioned, of a 3-part series, and today our focus is really going to be on what we would do to conduct an internal audit. So session 1 was all about preparing, session 2 conducting, and session 3 is going to be about reporting. We're going to use a case study today to work through the conduct of the audit, and that case study would have been sent to you in your participants folder. So there will be a couple of documents in there that I will be referring to, an information sheet and a marketing flyer. And the handout, your participants' handout, you will certainly need for today. And the case study that we're going to be working through actually starts on page 3 of your handout. Mel has just popped a link in the chat box for you. If you haven't already got those documents, please grab them now. So today there's really 5 things that we are going to be talking about. Setting the objectives for your audit, and we did talk briefly about this in session 1, but we're going to be applying it to this case study. So we're going to really look at how we might refine it for each different audit that we might do. We're going to look at the things that you might prepare for an audit, but particularly in a desktop type process, and that's something that most audits will have some form of desktop audit involved. We're going to look at gathering evidence through desktop reviews and site visits. We're going to look at how we might evaluate evidence and make an audit decision. And of course, that's the big one. That's the one we all struggle with. Doesn't matter if we've done one audit, internal audit, or 100. It's always the thing that's challenging. And we're also going to talk about briefing the people that we might be auditing. So this would be when we first get in contact with these people, as well as at the end of our audit process. So typically we call those things opening and closing meetings. Okay, so let's start at the start with this organisation that we're going to use for our case study today. So our imaginary RTO is Community RTO, where connection matters. And you have this case study on page 3 of your handout. So this is an organisation that offers the Certificate 3 in Community Services qualification, and they use 3 different approaches to do that. They offer this qualification online, they offer it in a work-based situation as traineeship, and they also offer it in a face-to-face situation. When you have a look at the marketing materials that this organisation provides, they're pretty generic, and they state that the students can choose the mode that suits them best. A student who started this course in online mode has recently approached the RTO, and they want to transfer to the face-to-face cohort because they've found that it's really difficult to complete the units in an online mode. In the online mode, they've managed to complete 3 of the elective units for the qualification. So the online lecturer also thinks that this student would be more suited to a face-to-face approach and is supporting of the move. Face-to-face team has rejected the transfer for the student as their program is fixed, and that they feel that the student has missed too much of the program to be able to fit into the program and be successful. Very naturally, the student is upset about this. and they've made a formal complaint to the RTO, and they have asked for that decision to be reviewed. When the RTO has investigated this, what they've found is that the three approaches offer very, very different versions of the qualification. There's a substantial difference in the electives that are offered, and the face-to-face cohorts also use clustering. And so looking at all of that, it actually seems it would be really difficult for this student to blend into the face-to-face with the clustering with the units that they have already completed. So what happened is the investigation of the complaint actually resulted in the RTO supporting the decision of the face-to-face lecturers. The student was refunded their course fees, and they were issued with a statement of attainment for the 3 units that they completed. So when it comes to what we might consider a resolution of a complaint, that's certainly one part of it. The decision has been made, it's been investigated, and actions have been taken in terms of the student being refunded their money and issued the statement of attainment for the units that they have done. But we do have a CEO in this organisation who has a catch cry, always audit ready. So she has actually asked you to do an internal audit to make sure that the RTO is compliant. And when we look at that, we go, wow, the RTO is compliant. Like, that is a how long is a piece of string statement. And so when you think about it from an internal audit perspective, it's almost like, where do we start in that very big statement? So there are lots and lots of reasons that we would conduct an internal audit. And in session 1, we certainly looked at the benefits of internal audit for an organisation. When you think about the vet sector, because most of our experience with audits is around that regulatory aspect of it, are we complying? That's often how we think about audits, but there are in fact lots of other reasons why we might do an internal audit. And that's actually the question that I want to ask you. In this circumstance, what are some other reasons that we might actually do an internal audit in Community RTO? And I want you to pop your answers in the chat box, please. And this shouldn't take us any more than a minute or so to do this. So what are some other reasons why we might do an internal audit for Community RTO? Answers in the chat box, please. Okay, so we've got some great answers in there. Thank you for those of you who contributed. And there's some commonality in some of the things that you have put in there. So a number of you have put comments like reviewing the policies and procedures and processes to make sure that they're working as you have intended them to do, to check that those policies and processes are robust. There's a couple of interesting ones. How many other students have made a complaint like this? Is this a one-off, or is it something that's quite common? Looking at context in there. Staff changes are a great time to actually have a look at how your organisation is operating. It can tell you very easily whether your induction processes work well for you. Focusing on continuous improvement, making the company great, business readiness. Making sure that the trainers know about what's happening. Yes, very good, very good. So when you think about the kinds of things that you have put there in the chat box, we could probably group some of those things together into headings. So for example, diagnostic, to determine what the root cause of the problems might be, to test the deployment of the policies and procedures, and a number of you have said that. Look for improvements in there, identify risk for the organisation. So when we're starting to talk about future business readiness, we're often talking about risk, and to identify good practice and learn from that practice. So in this case, while Adora has said to us she wants us to check that the organisation is compliant, I really do think that we have a diagnostic and deployment type focus to what we have to be doing. We need to figure out the root cause of this problem that's happened. It's resulted in a complaint, and to do that, we're going to obviously be looking at how those policies and procedures that they have in place in the organisation were deployed and whether they worked or not. So fundamentally, we have to figure out what, if anything, went wrong, and why that occurred, and why or how we could prevent that from happening again, if that's possible. So when we do that, what we really need to do is define the issues that exist in the complaint. So in this case, what's sitting in the case study. So what I want you to think about is what are the main issues that are showing up in that case study, and what clauses from the standards for RTOs do you think you would want to investigate? Now, you're going to need to look at the two files that were in the folder that was sent to you, the information certificate and the marketing flyer as well, as what is in the case study. What I'm going to ask you to do is to focus on maybe the key things that you think might be right, because there's always almost a never-ending list when you have a look at these things. So I want you to focus on what you think are the key clauses that you might investigate in an audit, in an internal audit, to address the main issues that exist in that case study. I think it's going to take you maybe 5 to 8 minutes to do that. And I'm actually going to turn the video and sound off while you do that. It's 10:15 by my clock. I'm going to check in with you at 10:20 to see how you're going. And I want you to put your answers as you're investigating this into the chat box, and then we will discuss what your responses are once we have finished that. I'll be here, so if you need to ask a question, please feel free to ask a question. Otherwise, I'll set you to work on that task. Okay, so let's talk about what you have put in the chat box. It's no problem, Katrina, you're allowed to repeat yourself. It's a Monday. So that is a perfect response from my perspective, because what it shows is that when we all look at something, we all work in the vet sector, we're all here because we are looking at conducting internal audits. And while there are some real commonalities in what you have put in there, sitting around standards 4 and 5, there are in fact a number of different clauses that people have chosen to look at, and that's the nature of VET, and it's the nature of our current regulatory standards, is that they're all interlinked, and sometimes something that happens in one clause can impact things that happen in other clauses. So when we look at the things that you have put in there, fundamental to that is that the students have got enough information to make a good decision about what they want to do. So there's a couple of standards that are focused on that, standards 4 and standards 5, and a number of you have picked out 5.1 and 5.2. You've also looked at the complaints process, and a number of you have also picked up the clauses that might sit around standard 1, the training and assessment strategy, when they're also different. Why didn't staff know about that? And we also have some clauses focusing on student needs, which is 1.7. So we are all landing in around about the same place. So fundamentally, when we think about what the issues are in that study, what we've got is maybe that the approach chosen was not suitable for the learner, that the learner can't easily change between those streams, and they didn't know that. the internal staff were not aware and potentially had advised the student incorrectly. And there's actually no information in any of the marketing documents that you saw that actually explain what's required to transition between streams. So based on that very, very quick look, we would probably focus on 5.1, 5.2, and I'm chopping that down because we only have an hour, and I would probably include lots of other standards if I had an unlimited amount of time. And you might also look at 1.1, which is about the strategy, providing a picture of how the courses would run. So for the purposes of today, let's say we focus on these two clauses. Prior to enrolment, the prospective learner is given information about the training product that's going to be appropriate to their needs, taking into account their skills and competencies. And prior to enrolment, the RTO provides information that's accurate and enables the learner to make an informed decision about the training that they are going to undertake. So when we are conducting an audit, in most cases, we will go through and we'll do some kind of desktop review process and some kind of on-site process. When we think about what we might look at in a desktop process, we have to look at it from a perspective of what's going to be most useful for us to review beforehand. And when I do that, ideally what I'm thinking about is what can I read beforehand that's going to provide me with a whole lot of context around being ready to talk to these people on site, so that I free up my time on site to actually interview people, to watch processes happening. I don't want to be sitting there reading. Sometimes you will have to do that because new evidence is presented, but ideally your desktop request is about things that will help you prepare to talk to people when you're on site. So you would need to request that information from the people that you are auditing. Sometimes you can do that through an email to them. Often it's great to actually pick up the phone and talk to them, or if you're in the same organisation, walk around to their office and have a conversation about what it is that you want to look at, and then have access to that information. Now, in our situation, in our desktop process, what was asked for was a copy of the complaint and the rectification, a marketing flyer, and the course information sheet. And you've got two of those three things. So the notes that you see in there in the right-hand column is very typical of the kind of notes that I might make out of a desktop review. So in this case, I'm saying the marketing flyer is very generic and would function to attract interest, but there's no significant course information provided in that flyer. The course information sheet is also generic, and it lists all possible electives that could be chosen across the three streams. So from the information that you've got there, it's unclear how the RTO is structuring the three streams, or where they might be providing potential learners about more specific information with the course that they have chosen. The complaint by the learner actually suggested that there had been an interview or discussion with the RTO prior to his enrolment. And so this is certainly something that you would need to discuss in a site visit. Now, from the information that I would have there, what I would then do next is I would write myself a series of questions that I wanted to ask at the site visit. And that is what we want you to do now, is to think about what questions, and I'm talking about main 3 to 5 questions that you might ask at a site visit. And you can use the notes section in your handout to help you think about those. And I'm going to ask you to share one of the questions that you want to ask in the chat box. We think this is going to take you about 5 minutes to do this maximum, and it's now 10:30. So again, I'm going to turn the microphone and camera off while you think about what questions you would want to ask at the site visit in response to what you saw from the desktop process, and to share one of those questions in the chat box. So we will be back at 10:34 to talk about your response. Okay, welcome back. So we have some great questions there in the chat box. Sorry, I've been looking at AI things. Chat bots are on my mind, so chat box. Right, so we have lots of questions about how do we select the elective options, why are they different for the different streams, how do we make sure that the unit selection meets the needs of your individual students, checking that everything is current and making sure that the marketing information is correct, student interview process, and how do we select the different delivery modes that affect the program structure. Lots of good questions there. So when we go on site, there would be people that we interview to ask these questions to. And let's see what they might have said to us. So in this situation, we certainly interviewed the trainer and assessor who was involved. We interviewed the course coordinator. We looked at the student's file. We looked at an information night PowerPoint, and we looked at the TAS for each of the 3 modes of delivery. And so you've got a bit of a summary there in front of you of what was said at each of those interviews and what we found in the 3 additional documents that we looked at when we did the site visit. So those interviews actually highlighted that, in fact, the course coordinator talks to all potential learners before they enroll, and this person has a process that they follow, but it's that process is not really documented. If anything pops up in the discussion with the potential learners, then a note is put into that student's individual file. So for the student that was the subject of the complaint, there were no notes in that file. So the assumptions are always dangerous, but the assumption is that there was nothing that came up in that interview that would suggest that there was a problem. So when that student was being talked to, what that course coordinator talked about was what experience the learner already has, their work and family commitments, their digital literacy, their ability to learn independently if they intend to take the online pathway. And the focus of that discussion is very much choosing an option that's best for that learner. So once they choose an option, so let's say I choose online, then I will go to an information night for that program. And all the details of that course are discussed. And if the learner chooses to enroll, that can be done on the night. The trainers and assessors for that specific program attend the information night to answer any questions that come from the learner. And the information night PowerPoint was very comprehensive and addressed all aspects of Clause 5.2. We also found out that the trainers and assessors don't deliver across different modes of the program. So if you're delivering in the online program, that's all you ever deliver. If you deliver in the face-to-face program, that's the only place that you ever deliver. And we also found out that of all the students who have been through the RTO, there haven't been any other complaints or issues that have been related to transition between programs. So when we think about the information that we got in a desktop review, it's very, very limited. Then when you start to think about the kind of information that you have from talking to people, you get a much clearer picture of what happens. And the reality is our first request for information, which was focused on the marketing flyer and the course information, there were more things that were added to that. So the information night PowerPoints, the TAS, the student file, and then the interviews rounded out and told us what actually happened with the interview process that is gone through. So we now have this situation where we have all of this information and we have to evaluate it. And this is actually the hard bit. And the reason it's hard is because we are all human. And when we are human, we all have ways that we like to do things and that we like for things to happen. But your job as an internal auditor is not to have everyone doing things your way. Your job is about being really objective as you look at that evidence and making a decision that is in line with whatever the scope of the audit is and the objectives of the audit is. So basically, you have to keep an open mind when you look at evidence. So when we evaluate evidence, there are a few things or a few questions that are going to help us do that. And they're on the chat box, on the slide that sits in front of you. So first of all, what is the requirement of the clause? What does it ask for? What processes have we got in place to meet the requirements of that clause? Were those processes used? Did the processes work? If they didn't work, what went wrong and how would we fix it? And if the processes worked, is there anything that we could do that could be improved? So what we want you to do is, with the evidence that you had from the slide before, and you've got a copy of that in your handout, we want you to actually think about what are the answers to these questions in relation to the evidence that you have been provided with for this case study. And we want you to spend about 5 minutes answering those questions, and then we will come back and discuss your answers. So pop your answers in the chat box once you have had a chance to think about it. Again, I'm going to turn the microphone and camera off. It's 10:41 now, so we'll be coming back at 10:46. So we have got information in there that suggests that we're all slightly uncomfortable about what might happen. I'm going to show you what I would write down. So generally I would put some kind of summary of the things that I thought about what I had seen in an audit. So in this case, I think the processes generally work and the complaint was an exception. We have one complaint, and when we have looked at any other documentation within the RTO, we didn't have anyone else having an issue or making a complaint. So possibly this person is the exception. The interview and the information night processes are actually really good processes. They've got substantial information about their courses, but there's probably two things that are missing in my view for this RTO. One, that it's actually made clear to the learners that it might not be possible for them to change streams once they've commenced. And actually this is the case for moving to the face-to-face program. And primarily that is because of the clustering. So clustering is a good thing, but it can also make it a little bit difficult when people are coming in or out of programs. So if you move from a face-to-face program to the online or a face-to-face to the workplace, there would be zero issues. It's only coming to the face-to-face program. And that all of the staff, including the trainers and assessors, they need to have a really clear understanding of how the different programs work so that they can advise learners about what might be best for them on the information nights, because you kind of have two bites at the cherry here. You've got the course coordinator who's talking to people and saying, well, we think this is right for you. But then you also have the information night where, again, they're getting more information and more opportunity to discuss. So we'd really want the staff at that session to be able to provide the right information for the learners. So I think there's probably 4 actions that might need or could be taken by the RTO. So one is that they review that course information sheet and they might add a sentence about the requirements of the different streams and the possibility of changing streams once that training has commenced. It doesn't have to be expansive information, but just that it's not always possible. Please talk to us about it. Review the information like PowerPoints and add information, particularly in the online and the workplace stream about moving to face-to-face at a later date, and make it really clear that it may not be possible. Brief all the trainers and assessors about the course structures, and maybe you might use the next team meeting to do that. And you would also update the TAS documents, I think, to include that information, because that TAS document is the guide for the trainer and assessor about how to implement that program. So some of us, so Joanne, I'm just having a look at your comment about the initial meetings needing to be documented. And that is something else that you might choose to put in there. In today's day and age, maybe that meeting is recorded, so it might not mean lots of writing. But you'll notice there that I have not put whether I think this is compliant or non-compliant, because I want to talk a little bit more about the kinds of decisions that we can make before we make a decision. Now, my guess is, having a look at your comments, is that there's probably nothing that I have put there that would be vastly different to what you yourselves would be thinking. If there is anything that's vastly different to what you would be thinking, please let us know in the chat box. When we make an audit decision after evaluating all of the evidence, then really we've got 4 options in terms of the decision we can make. We can make a decision of compliance, or we can make a decision of compliant with an opportunity for improvement. Now, this is a suggestion for an improvement to an RTO, and what it means is actually that you don't have to act on it. And sometimes, particularly in an external audit situation, we don't have the full picture of the RTO. We have seen a sample of things, and we don't understand necessarily the organisation's culture or a lot of the structuring, a lot of the personalities that are involved. And so decisions about whether you take our improvement on board are going to be made within your organisation, and they're going to be made on a broader base of information than what we had in an external audit situation. In an internal audit situation, you are most likely going to know all of that. And so it'll be far easier for you to make a suggestion for improvement, and for that improvement to be targeted to exactly how the organisation operates. You can also make a decision of non-compliance, and that means that the organisation has to take action. And you can make a decision about good practice. So this is something where the organisation is operating in an exceptionally good way, and it's a practice that you might want to acknowledge and spread throughout the organisation. So we have to decide what we're going to do for Community RTO in our internal audit situation. So what would I say? I would say it's an opportunity for improvement. Now, the reason that I would say this is that the complaint seems to be the exception. There are no other complaints or issues related to transition in the RTO. And it's really important to acknowledge that not everything works perfectly all of the time. So it's impossible really for RTOs to manage every single circumstance that might be presented to them. If this is a 1 in 1,000 issue, is it reasonable to say to the RTO, you must change the way you operate? It's certainly reasonable to say, hey, we've got some suggestions for you and we think this could prevent that. And that is why I have put opportunity for improvement there. When we think about the complaint standard, it talks about that we get complaints, that we acknowledge them, we investigate them, we make a decision, we take action on them, and we take action to prevent them from happening again. And all of that has happened in this RTO. So my absolute gut feeling about this RTO is that they are doing the right thing. There are things that could be improved, though, that would probably prevent this from happening again. It is not always easy to come to a consistent judgment around what is an opportunity for improvement and what is non-compliance. And my guess is if I had asked you to write in the chat box what your decision would have been, we would have had a mix of opportunities for improvement and non-compliance in there. And the important thing to take from that is when you have the luxury of working in an audit team, so there might be more than one internal auditor in your organisation, that you work together and that you discuss things and you moderate amongst one another so that you make consistent decisions in your organisation. If you don't have that luxury, then use your networks. It's certainly something that we do as external auditors for TAC. We have formal moderation sessions where we work together and look at the same evidence to make decisions. Sometimes we co-audit, and we also have informal moderations where we will talk to one another and say, this is the situation that I'm in, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And you can do exactly the same thing in an internal audit process. So absolutely use the networks and the brains of all of those people that you have around you to help you get better at conducting your own internal audits. When we brief the auditees, the people who are involved in the audits, there's things that we do at opening and closing meetings. So at the opening meetings, we do introductions, what everyone's role is and responsibility, and we will generally talk about the schedule. And this is particularly important for audits where they're a bit bigger and you might have multiple people involved. We give the people who are being audited an opportunity to ask questions and clarify anything, and we make sure that all of the plans and logistics that we have put in place in the planning part are actually still workable, and whether or not we make changes to make sure that we can actually achieve what we want to achieve in the process. So that opening meeting is really all about putting everybody at ease and making sure that all of our plans are going to work. And our closing meetings are about explaining the findings of the audit. Personally, I like to talk a lot during the audit so that when we get to closing meetings, there are absolutely no surprises for the people who are being audited, and that it's really about making sure everybody understands what it is in the finding of the audit. So if there is a non-compliance there, everybody understands why it's non-compliant. If it's an opportunity for improvement, everybody understands why we've chosen to make it an opportunity for improvement. So we certainly talk about what happens next, and that includes the kinds of timeframes that might be involved in responding. We have very hard and fast timeframes in an external audit. In an internal audit, that will be determined by the processes within your own organisation. So it might be you have a report the next day, it might be you have it in a week, it might be you have it in 2 weeks, whatever your processes are. We also have the opportunity for the people who are being audited to then ask questions. And again, this is making sure that everybody is comfortable and understands the process they've been through, that they're clear on the decisions and they know what is going to happen next. So while we've had an incredibly short time frame to actually talk about internal audits and how you might conduct them. It's a matter of learning with your colleagues and focusing on that, what did the standards require? What did I see? Did they do it? Did it work? And what would we need to do to fix anything that might have gone wrong? Be pragmatic as you think about that, and try not to be too broad-ranging in an internal audit. Focus on the core things that are causing the problems, and then when you fix those things, often everything else that sits around it disappears. So I hope that has been a clear message in what we have talked about today. In our next session, again, we're going to take some of the information that we have looked at today, and we're going to look at how we might report findings for this audit. We're going to talk about how to negotiate rectifications, and of course they are mandatory if there's non-compliance. We're going to talk about the kinds of timeframes for following up and the things that you might need to consider when you're thinking about those timeframes, how to close out an audit, and focusing on continuous improvement in your organisation. So again, I hope that you have had some information today that has been useful for you. If you have any questions, please get in contact with TAC. And there's also a lot of information that is available on TAC's website, including the fact sheet that sits with this that has a lot more detailed information in it. So thank you so much for your time today. And if you have any suggestions for us about how we can improve these workshops, please let us know. Otherwise, I will hopefully see you next Monday. Thank you.